The wine glass tipped, a crimson arc spilling through the air, colliding with my chest. Warm sauce splattered across my black leather jacket, the scent of arrogance stronger than the burn. She, flight attendant Sloane Walker, smirked like she owned the cabin. Around us, silence cut deeper than words. Eyes looked, then turned away. I didn't shout. I didn't flinch. I only slid the napkin aside, my gaze locking on hers. She had no idea who she'd just humiliated, or how quickly her world was about to collapse. One silent signal and the storm would arrive. I felt the moment split into frames. The stemless glass leaving her tray, the red meniscus clinging to crystal, gravity tugging it into a silk ribbon that unspooled over the aisle and found me. Wine slapped my chest, hot sauce following in a freckled spray, sliding down the lapels of my black leather jacket like a stain learning to write its name. The cabin's lights caught the mist and turned every droplet into a glitter of judgment. Business class hummed with the quiet of expensive indifference. My breathing stayed slow. I watched the arc complete itself, watched the last bead pause at the zipper and fall onto my thigh with a soft, indecent kiss. Sloane Walker's wrist never jerked in surprise. She tilted the tray the bare degree needed to seal the performance. Chin lifted, lips taut with that professional half-smile airlines teach and cruelty perfects. "Oops," she breathed to the air. Not to me. Her eyes flicked over my face as if auditing a forgery. She expected fluster, apology, noise. She expected anyone but me. I didn't give her noise. I lifted the napkin from the linen, unfolded it once, and pressed the edge into the spill at my collarbone, the way you defuse a wire. Contact, pressure, no shaking. Sauce warmed through the cotton, a slow burn that smelled faintly of tomatoes and pride. Passengers turned their heads and turned them back again. A man with silver hair lifted his phone, decided against it, tucked it away as if decorum were a sheath for cowardice. The woman in 4A pretended to read a menu she had already memorized. A couple whispered, the way people whisper when they want to be heard by no one and everyone. The aircraft moved through dusk. At the window, Los Angeles streaked into gold threads braided with freeways, and beyond them, the ocean sat black, patient. My reflection hovered on the double pane like a ghost learning to inhabit the living. 25 years distilled into that stare. The set jaw my mother said would keep me safe. The eyes my instructors taught to shave a scene down to its joints. I kept my shoulders neutral, an animal choosing not to bare its teeth. Sloane advanced the tray card a notch, close enough for me to smell citrus from her hair. She rotated her wrist, inspected the glassware, found no fault worth mentioning. The little smear of sauce on the rim of her watch band looked like a signature. "We'll bring a replacement," she said, and the tone ate the apology before the words could chew. Her smile asked me to accept the natural order of things. Her gaze told me what that order was. I dabbed the napkin. I did not cede the aisle. She waited for a flinch, a plea, a complaint to write into her report and mine. None arrived. Control is an instrument. It plays quieter than rage, but carries further. I breathed through the heat creeping across my sternum. The burn placed me exactly where I was. Seat 3A, aisle clear, emergency exits 2-4, 2 aft, camera in the forward bulkhead dead, safety card tucked behind the magazine where someone had highlighted evacuation routes in yellow. Who highlights a safety card? Someone rehearsing failure as if it were a task with a rubric. Silence expanded into a shape. It had edges, weight. It pressed against my eardrums until I could hear the minute friction of fabric as Sloane's sleeve slid past her elbow. She repositioned the tray, balancing it on fingertips that probably turned delicate when they wanted to. I watched the tilt begin again, a fraction too steep to be chance. A demonstration. The second wave came quieter, a drizzle designed for deniability. Red kissed my cheekbone and sketched south. Sloane drew breath as if to say something like, "There we go," and didn't. The show had a script. The script enjoyed itself. I caught each drip with that meek airline napkin and felt the softness collapse under the liquid. A paper flag surrendering in slow motion. Somewhere behind me, a seatbelt clicked, anxious hands needing work. The engine's tremor filled the pauses between the ice cubes chiming in tumblers. The cabin crew opposite Sloane glanced once, then away. The way colleagues share guilt like a coat no one wants to hold. When humiliation arrives in public, it arrives with witnesses who choose blindness for sport. They tug curtains of propriety across their faces and peer through the weave. I have known that theater since I was old enough to be underestimated. There is a mathematics to it. Your silence buys you time. Time buys you angles. Angles become exits. You never spend all three at once. Sloane's smile thinned, the way a wire thins when heat runs through it. She lowered her voice. "It's surprising, isn't it?" she murmured. "Who ends up in business class these days?" The sentence wore politeness like a mask pulled loose at the jaw. I let it pass as if my English were poor, as if the words fell short of me. The route map on the screen traced our descent in a pale arc into a city practiced at landing everyone and welcoming no one. I could have stood. I could have asked for a supervisor, a form, a name. I could have made a fist. Instead, I used the only motion I needed, a slow sweep of my gaze across the cabin, collecting faces the way a net collects light. An elderly woman beside me had been still as a photograph. Her hands rested on a small purse, the leather gently crazed like a lake in winter. She looked at me and held the look as if testing whether it would be allowed. I dipped my chin the faintest degree. Permission granted. Her fingers moved. From the purse she drew a handkerchief, white, with a small violet embroidered in one corner. Time had ironed it to a sort of gentleness nothing new can fake. She folded it once and set it on the armrest between us. Not pushing, not offering, merely making space for the existence of help. Her eyes returned to the forward bulkhead and stayed there, as if she'd never moved at all. Violet on white. The color registered like a bell under snow. I could smell starch, lavender, a clean that always belonged to someone else's childhood. I slid the paper napkin aside, the one with the airline slogan promising care, and took the handkerchief. Cotton drank what shame refused to. I pressed the violet to the sauce on my jacket and felt heat bleed into the fabric until all that remained on my skin was the memory of it, which is to say, the part that matters longer. Sloane watched the exchange and found nothing in it to punish. Kindness is the only contraband that passes unchecked. She shifted her weight, pushed the cart, stopped. "Can I clear anything?" she asked the row behind, but the question hung in front of me like steam. I rested back into the seat, leather whispering. The handkerchief remained in my hand, anchored to the sting by purpose now. The aircraft nosed lower. City lights multiplied until they were numbers, until they were proof that billions of choices can glow at once. I measured my pulse, slow, precise. My instructors would have approved. They taught that rage is Novocaine for the mind. You feel nothing, and then you lose the limb. This wasn't rage. This was a ledger. Debits are recorded. Credits arrive later, quietly, on time. A droplet tracked the inside of my wrist like a second hand. I followed it with the violet, blotting. In the reflection, Sloane stood behind my shoulder like a future. I could sense the next escalation arranging itself. The invented compliance check, the bag inspection designed to go wrong. Scripts like this rarely improvise. They repeat, louder, until someone grants them the scene they came for. I was not going to grant it here. I placed the handkerchief in my lap, folded to hide the stain it had absorbed. My fingers found the edge of my jacket, straightened it, smoothed the zip. The leather cooled as the air conditioning lifted a hush from the vents. Around me, the audience pretended not to exist. My jaw unclenched. My eyes softened to an ordinary stare. You cannot spring a trap that looks asleep. Sloane exhaled through her nose, an almost sigh. She rolled the cart forward, paused, then angled it minutely so its corner kissed my knee. The apology that followed was a blurred, professional shape that could be shown to a manager if needed. She moved on, harvesting plates, collecting proof of her competence from people thrilled to be part of service when service is power and never responsibility. As she reached the galley, I let my gaze return to the window. The runway lights rhymed themselves into perspective. The aircraft's body softened into that peculiar pre-landing stillness that feels like a held breath. I held mine with it. My face in the glass belonged to a woman taking a flight, a woman who would sleep and forget. Behind the face, another count began, no different in rhythm from a prayer and as unsentimental. 3 exits, 2 weak links, 1 message. When the time came, the message would be shorter than mercy. The handkerchief lay warm in my palm. I turned it over once, letting the violet catch the overhead light and flare for a heartbeat. Then I folded it into my jacket pocket and closed my eyes as if I were choosing rest. The cabin accepted the lie. So did Sloan. So did everyone who needed to believe the story would end where it started, with a spill, a smirk, and a woman too polite to matter. The handkerchief's fabric was still warm in my pocket, its faint lavender scent threading through the recycled air. I let my gaze drift down the aisle, not to admire the plush leather or the champagne bubbles catching light, but to take inventory. Inventory is never about objects. It's about the people who touch them. The forward bulkhead camera was dead. I'd noticed it when boarding, the red indicator dark, the lens tilted just enough off-center to miss the aisle. A deliberate outage. Crew claimed those malfunctions as technical and let them languish until the right eyes were looking elsewhere. It meant there were shadows here no one official could see. Sloan reappeared, leaning into the galley's threshold, head angled toward the cockpit door. Her voice carried the careful pitch of someone speaking without wanting to be heard, which meant every vowel was worth hearing. The captain's head inclined once. His jaw tightened, then slackened, as if agreeing to something he hadn't yet decided. The door closed with that padded thud meant to reassure passengers they were in safe hands. 2 rows ahead, a man in a navy blazer sat with a file folder balanced on his knee, its paper edges marked with orange tags. He wasn't reading. His eyes stayed on the same paragraph too long, lips barely moving. The muscle in his jaw twitched in time with the page turns. His body language told me those documents weren't for him. They were for whoever might catch a glimpse. Misdirection as old as tradecraft. Show one thing to hide another. I leaned back, letting the leather embrace my shoulders, head turned just enough toward the window to appear disengaged. In the reflection, I could watch the aisle without the effort of turning. Flashback. Not memory exactly, but recall drilled so deep it feels like the present. Training floor at Camp Albright. Linoleum that never stopped smelling faintly of bleach. Sergeant Mendez walking the perimeter of a classroom. Boots quiet, voice quieter. You think you'll act in the moment. You won't. You'll act before the moment if you've read it right. So, read it right. His eyes would pass over us like a scanner. Your disguise isn't what you wear. It's the fact you don't need one until it's too late for them to stop you. Back in the cabin, I smoothed the front of my jacket, more for the movement than the need. The sleeve shifted enough for a small detail to catch light. A brass key ring hooked at my belt, its nylon lanyard printed in charcoal letters. Sentinel Arrow. Not large enough to read from a distance, but a detail meant for the observant. Sentinel Arrow was known in the industry, but not to the public. An aviation security tech firm with contracts buried in non-disclosure agreements, board members who never gave interviews, and products that didn't exist in catalogs. The logo had a habit of making people either lean in with questions or look away entirely. Here, it was bait. From the corner of my eye, I saw the man with the orange tabbed file shift in his seat, glancing toward the key ring before resettling into his pantomime of reading. Sloan returned down the aisle, her eyes grazing me like a fingernail across glass, lingering for half a beat too long on the brass glint at my hip. She didn't comment. She didn't need to. Recognition had a smell. It was in the tightening of the air, the way a cat scents another predator. The engines altered pitch, signaling a slow descent. The cabin lights adjusted in sympathetic dimness. Flight attendants performed their choreography. Trash collected, seatbacks checked, belts cinched. But Sloane's sequence was off. She skipped certain passengers entirely, doubling back to others, bending low enough that her hair brushed their armrests. At each pause, her fingers pressed briefly into the side of the serving cart, as if marking the beats of a metronome only she could hear. The galley curtain rustled. Another crew member stepped through, murmured to Sloane, then glanced toward the man with the folder. She nodded once, a subtle punctuation, and wheeled the cart forward. The man closed his folder at the exact moment her back was turned, sliding it into the seat pocket without looking down. It bulged there unnaturally, a staged imperfection. I shifted in my seat, crossing one ankle over the other, hands resting lightly on my knees. The lanyard swung slightly, catching a sliver of LED glow from the aisle lighting. The reflection in the window showed the man's gaze drawn to it again. His breathing changed, slower, more deliberate. Flashback, another drill. This time, rooftop at dusk, the city spread below. Instructor Aria Blake standing too close, voice low enough to get past the adrenaline. Never force their hand, invite it. Make them think they're the one who spotted the crack. They'll lean in to widen it, and that's when they fall. I angled my body, just enough to let the key ring rest in plain view against the armrest. Not ostentatious, not hidden, present. Within 2 minutes, the man with the folder uncrossed his legs, reached into the seat pocket, and withdrew the file. He placed it on the empty seat beside him, cover open, as though reconsidering whether to continue reading. Sloane passed again, catching the exchange, her lips pressing into a line that almost smiled. She pivoted toward me, pausing at my row. "Would you like anything else before we land?" she asked. Her tone was silk stretched over wire. I met her gaze evenly. "I'm fine," I said, letting the consonants settle. In the reflection, I saw the man glance toward the cockpit. Timing was congealing into something less like routine and more like arrangement. Sloane leaned subtly, her voice dropping. "Interesting key ring," she said. The sentence held no question mark, yet demanded an answer. I offered none. Let silence fill the space until it became awkward enough for her to break. She didn't, not right away. She held her ground for 3 beats, then straightened, adjusting her jacket as though nothing had been said. The seatbelt sign chimed on. Passengers shuffled in their seats, retrieving bags from underfoot, gathering scattered devices and half-finished magazines. Sloane vanished into the forward galley. The man with the folder tucked it away into a slim briefcase, locking the clasps with an almost ceremonial precision. The nose of the aircraft dipped further. My eyes traced the seam of the bulkhead door, noting the subtle scratch marks near the latch. Recent, faint. Someone had practiced opening it without alerting the cabin crew, or perhaps with their consent. In my pocket, the violet handkerchief lay folded around the broken pen. The cotton softness a foil to the brass bite of the keyring. Symbols of 2 different lives, one that had ended in betrayal, one still in play. The hum of the engines was steady, but there was a discordant undertone now, a vibration in the air that didn't belong to machinery. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the map draw itself in my head. Forward bulkhead camera dead, cockpit crew in collusion, one passenger running a play with a visible prop, lead attendant aware and possibly coordinating. The vectors converged in one place, the moment the cabin door opened at the gate. When I opened my eyes, the reflection in the glass showed me looking calm, maybe even tired. Inside, every muscle was a wire, and every wire was live. The descent continued. My hand rested on my thigh, fingers brushing the key ring. The smallest movement, enough to catch the light one more time. The man with the folder looked again, and this time he smiled, quick, sharp, like a match struck in the dark. Invitation accepted. The landing gear thumped into position beneath us, a muffled announcement to everyone that the journey was almost over. But for me, the real descent hadn't even begun. Sloane emerged from the forward galley with a look too calm for the bustle around her. Her hands were empty, which was strange enough. Flight attendants usually carried something as a prop, paperwork, a tray, a checklist, to disguise their real purpose. She stopped at my row, bracing one hand on the headrest beside me. "Security sweep," she said, voice projecting just enough to make sure nearby passengers heard. "We've had a report of irregular items." She didn't look at anyone else, just me. I didn't move immediately. "Irregular?" I asked, as if the word were in a language I was trying out for the first time. Her smile tilted. "Please open your bag." The man in the navy blazer, the one with the orange tabbed folder, shifted in his seat a few rows ahead. His head turned slightly, pretending to check the aisle behind him, but his eyes, in the reflection off a polished armrest, were on me. I pulled my carry-on from under the seat. The zipper's metal teeth rasped like a blade being drawn. Sloane took the handle from me before I could open it myself, laying it across the empty seat beside me as if I were being granted a service. She didn't ask permission to unzip. The bag's mouth opened, and my life in miniature stared back. A rolled leather case of pens, a paperback novel swollen from a past rain, a travel-sized first aid kit, a change of clothes folded with military precision. Sloane plunged a manicured hand in, producing each item with the care of a jeweler displaying contraband. She set them on the seat one by one, the pile growing, my privacy evaporating. Then she reached the bottom and drew out the pen, silver, weighty, its clip engraved with initials that were not mine, those of the man who had taught me to take control of chaos, who had not lived to see me use it. The cap clicked once as she inspected it. A flicker of something passed through her eyes, recognition, or maybe just satisfaction at finding something that could be framed as suspicious. Without warning, she let it drop from her fingers. The pen hit the armrest's edge, rolled to the floor. Before I could reach, the heel of her shoe came down. A sharp crack split the air, louder in the hush of the cabin than any turbulence. The pen lay in two pieces, the cap and body parted. The nib twisted and bent like a broken limb. The sound landed somewhere in my chest. I felt it before I heard it fully. That pen had been there on my first mission briefing, tucked behind the ear of a man who believed in method over glory. It had signed my acceptance into Sentinel Arrow's inner circle. Now it was debris at my feet. Passengers pretended not to notice, which meant they noticed acutely. The man in the navy blazer had turned fully now, his phone angled discreetly toward the scene. A faint click from the shutter, masked by the shuffle of Sloane's hands through my belongings. I crouched, not to snatch up the pen but to gather it slowly, deliberately. The violet handkerchief came from my pocket without my eyes leaving hers. I wrapped each fragment in cotton, the embroidery facing inward, sealing it as though it were evidence. Sloane's voice was light, professional. Travelers are reminded that all items must comply with international regulations. She placed the last of my belongings back into the bag without the care she'd taken in removing them. The paperback landed on top, its spine bending the wrong way. "Is that all?" I asked, tone even. "For now." She zipped the bag halfway, leaving the opening gaping like an unfinished thought. She set it back at my feet and moved on without a backward glance. I let the quiet fill the vacuum she left. The man with the phone lowered it, thumb dancing briefly across the screen. The reflection in the window showed him pressing send. Whatever he'd captured was now in motion, moving faster than any aircraft. The captain's voice came over the intercom, giving the standard approach briefing. His tone was smooth, but the inflections betrayed haste. We were on final. Passengers shuffled in their seats, some oblivious, some alert in ways they couldn't name. I slipped the bag under my seat, resting a boot lightly against it. My palm stayed over the wrapped pen, feeling the edges through the fabric. Not jagged enough to cut, but sharp in ways that mattered more. Flashback. A training bay lined with lockers, the scent of gun oil and ozone. My instructor setting down that very pen beside a map. People will go for what they think is sentimental. They'll think they've weakened you. Let them. The moment they think you're hurt, they stop watching your hands. I breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth, the rhythm of someone readying for a sprint they might have to run sitting still. The man in the navy blazer rose suddenly, as if preparing for the aisle to clear. His phone was gone, replaced by a boarding pass he studied too intently for someone about to land. The briefcase with the orange-tabbed folder sat under his seat, handle turned outward, ready for a quick grab. I cataloged it all. The broken pen, the wrapped cloth, the man's shifting role from observer to messenger. The photo he'd sent would ripple outward, touching hands I hadn't yet seen. Sloane's little display had been more than humiliation. It had been a signal. Seatbelts clicked. The cabin's air pressure shifted as the flaps extended. City lights began to sharpen below us, the grid unfolding like a lit blueprint. I leaned back, closing my eyes briefly, not to rest, but to map the next moments. The line had been crossed, not a misunderstanding, not an accident. Sloane had marked me, destroyed a piece of my past, and done it in a way that invited the whole cabin to witness without intervening. It was the oldest trick in the book: isolate, degrade, and see how the target reacts. I was reacting exactly how they didn't want, by appearing not to react at all. The handkerchief in my pocket was heavier now, not from the pen's weight, but from the gravity of what it meant. They'd drawn first blood, even if it wasn't visible. That meant the counterstroke could be justified, precise, and, when the time came, final. Through the window, the runway's sequenced lights began their hypnotic chase toward us. Somewhere beyond the airport perimeter, messages were arriving on secure devices, triggering responses, setting plans in motion. The man in the blazer glanced down at his watch and smiled to himself, a small, private curve of the lips. He thought he was ahead. Let him. The wheels kissed the tarmac with that low, resonant shudder that travels up through the bones. The reverse thrusters roared, then faded into a hum. Around me, the cabin exhaled, buckles unlatched with a chorus of clicks. Bags shifted in overhead bins. The illusion of safety settled like a thin blanket. I didn't move. My hands rested on my knees, posture relaxed, eyes on the seat back in front of me. Inside my jacket pocket, the handkerchief and broken pen lay like a concealed wound. My other hand drifted to the slim phone tucked into an inner pocket, matte black, no logo, no manufacturer's mark. I cupped it in my palm, screen hidden from view, thumb finding the encrypted messaging app by muscle memory. The text field blinked open. I typed 3 characters: B target C12. A pause. Not hesitation, but precision. I tapped send. The message slid into the ether, wrapping itself in layers of encryption, bouncing through relays like a fugitive with 100 false passports. Somewhere, a receiver vibrated silently. Somewhere, eyes narrowed at the designation and fingers began moving fast. I slipped the phone away, its screen going black before it vanished into the lining of my jacket. My breathing stayed slow. Outwardly, I was just another passenger waiting for the door to open. Through the oval window, the jet bridge extended toward us, a metal throat preparing to swallow the plane. Rain flecked the glass, blurring the sodium lights on the tarmac into amber halos. In that distortion, I saw movement. Dark shapes low to the ground, deliberate, coordinated. Cut. A mile from the terminal, 3 SUVs rolled in formation, matte black paint swallowing what little light touched them. No headlights, only the faint blue glimmer of dashboard screens. Tires whispered over wet asphalt. In the lead vehicle, a man in tactical gear adjusted his earpiece, eyes scanning the perimeter on a thermal display. A green dot pulsed at the corner of the screen. Our gate. Prime actual, confirmed target C12, he said into his mic. In the second SUV, the commander, Reed, checked his watch. Confirmed. 0 visibility to external cams. We're green. They didn't need sirens. This wasn't a show for the public. It was a removal. Cut back. Inside the cabin, the fasten seatbelt sign chimed off. Passengers rose in a rustle of coats and carry-ons, the choreography of disembarkation beginning its first act. Sloane appeared at the forward galley, smile switched on, thanking people in a voice that belonged to someone else entirely. Her eyes slid over me and kept going, as if I were already gone. The first passenger stepped into the aisle, pulling a roller bag that bumped against armrests. The line began to form, a slow-moving current toward the front. I stayed seated. 2 rows ahead, the man in the navy blazer was on his phone again, head turned just enough to watch the aisle behind him. He didn't notice the slight shift in cabin air pressure, the kind that comes when the door opens, but not to the jet bridge. Cut. The lead SUV slid into position against a restricted gate. Side doors opened in unison. Figures in black poured out, rifles slung, movements efficient and almost silent despite the gear. They split into 2 teams, one heading for the jet bridge access, the other toward the service stairwell beneath the plane. Cut back. A ripple went through the passengers near the front, confusion bending their posture. Someone murmured, "That's not," and then trailed off. Boots hit the carpeted aisle with a muted thud. The first operator came into view, helmet, visor, matte body armor. His rifle was pointed down but ready behind him. Reed entered, scanning the cabin with the economy of someone who knew exactly what he was looking for. His gaze found me in under 2 seconds. The man in the blazer froze mid-turn, phone still in hand. Sloane's smile faltered for a fraction, then reassembled itself. Reed walked the aisle without hurry, passengers shrinking back into their seats. When he reached my row, he stopped, squared himself, and in front of a dozen pairs of bewildered eyes, brought his hand up in a crisp, military-perfect salute. The air in the cabin thickened. Whispers rose and died. I returned the salute with the barest nod. "All yours," I said, low enough for only him to hear. Reed turned, nodding once to his team. 2 operators moved to the man in the blazer, pulling him gently but firmly into the aisle. His phone disappeared into a black evidence pouch. The briefcase followed. "Passenger cooperation is appreciated." Reed's voice carried down the cabin, pitched to sound like a standard security announcement. It wasn't. Sloane's gaze darted between me, Reed, and the man being escorted out. She opened her mouth, closed it, then stepped back into the galley. Her hand smoothed her skirt, but the motion didn't hide the tension in her jaw. Passengers sat frozen, half standing, unsure whether to resume their exodus or stay put. No one wanted to be next. Reed leaned in just enough for his visor to reflect my own eyes back at me. "Target C-12 secure. We're moving to phase 2, he murmured. I gave a slight tilt of my head toward the forward door. "Cargo D7, I said. Just 3 syllables, but enough to send a ripple through his stance. He nodded once, then straightened, motioning to his team. The man in the blazer was already halfway down the jet bridge, flanked on both sides. Reed followed, his other team members dispersing, some exiting with the passenger, others moving aft toward the service stairwell. In less than 30 seconds, the aisle was clear again. The only sign anything had happened was the way people clutched their bags tighter, the way they avoided looking at me or the galley. I stayed seated for another beat, letting the cabin's heartbeat slow. Sloane reappeared, eyes narrowed, the mask slipping just enough for me to see the edge of the game. She knew the field had shifted, she just didn't know how far. The jet bridge connected fully with a dull clang. The regular disembarkation resumed, awkward and halting, as if everyone sensed the rules had changed. I rose only when the last row ahead was stepping off. The violet handkerchief was still in my pocket, wrapped around the broken pen, the weight now joined by the awareness that the next move was mine. The cabin smelled faintly of ozone, the trace of tactical gear and rain carried in by the team. Passengers were already whispering theories in low voices, words like terrorist and VIP floating between rows. I stepped into the jet bridge behind the last operator, The muffled slap of boots on rubber flooring punctuated by the click of my own heels. Reed was waiting at the junction where the jet bridge met the terminal. His visor was up now, revealing a face that had been weathered by more years in the field than I'd been alive. He didn't waste time. The moment I cleared the threshold, he straightened, boots together, and brought his hand up in a precise salute. I returned it, not out of ceremony, but because Reed was a man who earned gestures, not demanded them. He stepped closer, pulling a ruggedized tablet from a waterproof pouch on his chest rig. The screen woke under his thumb, casting a cold blue light across his face. "Thought you'd want to see this," he said, turning it toward me. The photo on the screen froze me for half a heartbeat, not because of shock, but because it confirmed a suspicion I'd been circling since the moment wine hit my jacket. Sloane Walker. Her official crew headshot stared out from the corner of a dossier, neat as a passport photo. Beneath it, a name I knew far too well. Operative ID, Red Basin. Tier 3 asset, Red Basin. The network whose tendrils reached into logistics, banking, even certain government contracts. Their cargo moved under diplomatic seals, their operatives under civilian covers so airtight it took months to puncture one. "She's been on our board for 6 months, Reed said. "We didn't have the in until now." I kept my voice even. "And now you do." He tapped the screen again, and the image shifted to a manifest. "Here's the part you'll like." Rows of text scrolled past. Shipping codes, container IDs, origin points. One entry pulsed in red. Cargo D7, container 308. The details were stripped, replaced with the word restricted. "Walker was supposed to shepherd this load through without inspection," Reed said. "Whatever's in it, they wanted it off this runway and into private storage within 30 minutes of landing." I tilted the tablet slightly, reading the timestamps. "This shipment's been shadowed since it left Jakarta," I murmured. 3 false transfers. A customs clearance from a country that doesn't even have a customs office at that port. Reed's mouth tightened. "And your name's not on any of it." The information landed like a quiet stone in a still pond. Not me. Not this time. The performance in the cabin, the public humiliation, it hadn't been about drawing attention to my presence. It had been about keeping me occupied, tying me down so my eyes weren't where they needed to be. I handed the tablet back. They wanted me looking at her while the real prize rolled out the back door. Reed nodded once. The blazer we pulled, he was the courier, not the carrier, just the relay to the real target. The feeling in my chest shifted. Less heat, more calculation. This wasn't a knife aimed at my throat. It was a decoy flare. And in the seconds that followed, I could almost hear the audience in my head. That subtle drop in the stomach when a twist undercuts what they thought they knew. I glanced toward the terminal windows. Rain tracked lazy paths down the glass, distorting the view of the cargo yard. Beyond the shimmer, I could make out the skeletal arms of cranes, the squat silhouettes of containers under floodlights. Somewhere in that maze sat 308. Reed's voice cut back in. "We've locked down D7's primary access. Secondary still open until we get FAA sign-off." "Close it," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "Without sign-off?" "Close it," I repeated, tone flat. "You want Red Basin's next 6 months mapped out? You'll need what's in that box." For a beat, the only sound was the low murmur of passengers spilling into the terminal behind us. Then Reed thumbed his comms. "All units, lock down secondary access D7. Repeat, full lockdown." I stepped to the side, letting a small cluster of passengers pass. One of them, a man in a gray hoodie, glanced at me twice, his expression too blank to be casual. I filed his face away for later. Reed adjusted the tablet strap across his chest. "You planning to make the pickup yourself?" I looked back toward the jet bridge. Sloane would be somewhere in that thin corridor, hemmed in by passengers who thought they were escaping a drama instead of standing in the wings of a much larger one. "First," I said, "we keep Walker in place. If she knows the box is compromised, she'll light it before we touch it." Reed gave a half smile. Always 2 moves ahead. "It's not ahead," I said. "It's just refusing to play their move." He turned toward the stairwell that led down to the tarmac, motioning for two of his operators to follow. "We'll intercept at D7 in 10. I stayed where I was for a moment, watching the reflections in the terminal glass. Behind me, travelers merged into the flow of the airport, eyes glazed with the single-minded focus of reaching baggage claim. Out there, in the rain and floodlight shadows, was the actual game. The emotional current in the room had shifted. What began as an upward surge of adrenaline when the team stormed the cabin had now settled into something slower, more deliberate. The tension was still there, but it was threaded with curiosity. Even in my own chest, the heat from the confrontation with Sloane cooled, replaced by the more measured pulse of strategy. I could work with that. I turned away from the window, stepping back toward the gate entrance. A gate agent was pretending to organize a stack of boarding passes, her eyes flicking nervously toward the jet bridge. She froze when I approached, as if I were about to ask for something she didn't have. "Walker stays put," I told her quietly. "She's not to leave this gate until she's cleared by Reed's team." The agent nodded quickly, relief and confusion mingling on her face. From the corner of my eye, I caught sight of the man in the gray hoodie again, slipping through a service door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." I considered following, but D7 took priority. For now. As I moved toward the stairwell, Reed's voice echoed faintly from below. "D7 secured. Awaiting breach order." I tightened my grip on the violet handkerchief in my pocket, the broken pen's weight a reminder of the message Sloane thought she'd delivered. She wasn't the story here, not the main one. The box at cargo D7 was, and I intended to open it before anyone else could decide what was inside. The gate area had that strange hush of a storm waiting to break. Passengers milled near the glass, pretending to check their phones, but their eyes kept darting toward the jet bridge. Reed's team was already moving toward the stairwell for the D7 intercept, leaving only two operators stationed at the gate to keep Sloane boxed in. I stepped back into the jet bridge, the air warmer here, recycled and tight. Sloane stood midway down the narrow tunnel, hemmed in by a knot of passengers waiting to disembark. She looked smaller without the backdrop of the business class cabin, but the tension in her posture told me that illusion wouldn't last. Her gaze flicked to me, then down to my pocket, where the outline of the violet handkerchief might as well have been a challenge. A faint smile ghosted across her lips, not amusement, but calculation. The lead operator nearest her shifted his stance. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to..." It happened in a breath. Sloane bent as if to adjust her heel, fingers finding the concealed latch in the sole. A soft click, and the rubber cap came away to reveal a sliver of polished steel, no longer than a handspan. She came up fast, the blade tucked against her forearm, angling it toward the nearest passenger. The woman she grabbed wore an oversized sweatshirt and carried a cheap duffel. She looked startled, almost clumsy, as Sloane yanked her into a headlock, pressing the blade under her chin. "Back off!" Sloane hissed, voice low but slicing through the murmur of the jet bridge. The operator froze, rifle angled down, but ready. I moved without announcing it. The leather of my jacket whispered as I shrugged it off, folding it once in midair and tossing it onto an empty seat by the bulkhead. The black combat suit beneath clung like a second skin, matte and unremarkable except for its precision. The kind of uniform you could disappear in, or strike from. Sloane's eyes widened just enough to register recognition. She adjusted her grip on the woman, blade tightening against pale skin. The passengers had gone silent, their breath the only noise in the narrow space. I took a slow step forward, my hands open and slightly away from my sides. "You don't want to do this," I said evenly. "I'm already doing it," she shot back, her voice carrying the edge of someone with nothing to lose. "Wrong," I corrected. "You're buying time, but you're not buying enough." Her brow furrowed, just enough of a break in focus. I moved. 3 steps in less than a second, closing the distance. My left hand caught the wrist holding the blade, thumb pressing into the nerve cluster until her fingers spasmed. My right hand grabbed the collar of the sweatshirt, her hostage's sweatshirt, and yanked down hard, twisting both bodies in a pivot that used Sloane's own momentum to spin her off balance. The knife clattered to the floor, skidding against the metal seam. I kicked it back toward the operator without looking. In the same motion, I used my forearm to pin Sloane's arms to her sides, leveraging her against the wall of the jet bridge. She struggled, boots scraping the rubber flooring, but the space was too narrow for her to find leverage. The woman she'd held stumbled back, coughing once, her duffel hitting the wall with a dull thud. And then she straightened. Gone was the clumsy passenger act. Her posture shifted, center of gravity lowering, stance aligning, hands coming up not in fear but readiness. Her eyes, when they met mine, were clear and assessing. The operator nearest us caught it at the same moment I did. "Special Agent Callan," she said, her tone almost cordial. "Red Basin, Tier 2. Twist delivered. The hostage was one of them. My grip on Sloane didn't change, but my attention split. Callan's gaze darted to the fallen blade, then back to me, weighing options. She wasn't here to save Sloane. She was here to keep her from talking. Reed's voice crackled faintly over my earpiece. "D7 secure. Status at the gate?" I didn't take my eyes off Callan. "Containment. 2 assets." Callan took a step forward. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said, voice low. "I'm known for that," I replied. The operator scooped up the blade, handing it off to his partner without looking away from Callan. Passengers were being quietly ushered past us into the terminal, their eyes wide, their pace quick. Sloane tried to jerk free, but I tightened the pin, forcing a breath from her lungs. "You think you're still running this?" I said into her ear. "You're not." Callan's weight shifted, preparing to make a move. My free hand came up, palm out, the universal signal for don't. She hesitated. It was all I needed. "Gate, lock this down," I told the operator. "No one in or out without my say." He keyed his radio. The glass doors to the terminal slid shut, and a pair of airport security officers took up position outside, looking in with the wary expressions of people who had no idea what they were guarding. I began to walk Sloane toward the bulkhead, keeping her arms pinned. Callan tracked us but didn't follow, her eyes flicking once toward the terminal doors. She was calculating an exit now, not a rescue. As we reached the forward galley, Reed's voice returned in my ear. "Container 308's not here. Decoy. We've got an empty shell." Of course it was. Red Basin's hallmark, layered misdirection. I shoved Sloane gently but firmly into an empty jump seat, securing the harness before she could resist. "You stay put," I told her. Her smirk returned, thinner now. "You think this ends here?" I leaned in close enough for only her to hear. "No, but it ends for you." Callan was gone when I turned back toward the jet bridge, her absence as deliberate as her arrival. Somewhere in the terminal, she was already melting into the flow of bodies, her mission adjusted but not abandoned. I retrieved my jacket, sliding it back over my shoulders. The combat suit disappeared beneath leather, my breathing already slowing. Around us, the jet bridge felt emptier, the chaos compressed into memory. The audience's heartbeat, mine included, was climbing again, but now it carried a thread of uncertainty. Every rescue has the potential to turn on itself. Every victory, a shadow. And somewhere in that shadow, Callan was moving. The radio in my ear crackled, Reed's voice cutting through the residual noise of the jet bridge. "Gate contained. Your call on next steps." I slid my jacket back into place, zipping it halfway as I walked toward the service stairwell. "I'm taking command," I said into the mic. "All teams, this is Sinclair. Lock down cargo D7. Full perimeter. No movement in or out until I give the word." A chorus of affirmatives came back, each voice a different distance away, painting the map in my mind. 2 units already on the west perimeter, one at the service road, another moving through the south hangar. Rain slicked the metal steps under my boots as I descended to the tarmac. The air hit me in a cold, damp slap, heavy with jet fuel and the constant low thunder of idling engines. Across the field, D7 squatted under yellow floodlights. Its corrugated steel walls streaked dark with age and weather. The security cordon was already taking shape. Uniformed airport officers mingling awkwardly with Reed's operators, trying to assert authority without being told they'd lost it. I moved straight through, the lanyard still clipped to my belt, swinging just enough to catch the light. At the main entrance, a familiar figure stepped into my path. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to—" He stopped mid-sentence, recognition hitting him like a second breath. Ava? It had been years, but the face was the same, lined a little deeper, eyes dulled at the edges, but unmistakable. Mark Halden, Chief of Terminal Security. The man who had pulled me out of a burning consulate in Tangier when a job had gone sideways, who'd taken a knife in the shoulder so I could make the extraction window. "Mark." My voice was steady, but something tightened in my chest. "Didn't expect to find you here." He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Likewise, this your operation?" "Mine now," I said. "We've got an asset trying to move something through this bay. I need it locked down." His jaw worked as he glanced over my shoulder, scanning the perimeter. "That might be complicated." "Why?" "Because," he said slowly, "the item you're after is already on a pallet in Bay 3, and I've been instructed to let it go." The air between us went cold in a way the rain couldn't touch. "Instructed by who?" Mark didn't answer immediately. That pause was its own admission. He looked away toward the shadows where forklifts idled like patient beasts. It hit me then. Not just what he'd said, but what it meant. He wasn't an unwitting pawn. He was part of it. "You're with them," I said, the words flat. His gaze came back to mine, unflinching. "It's not as black and white as you think, Ava. There are deals being made here that keep worse things from happening." I almost laughed. "That's the line they sold you? That letting a network like Red Basin move their cargo under your watch is some kind of civic duty?" "Ava, no." I stepped in, closing the space between us. "You saved my life once, and I'll never forget that. But right now, you're standing between me and something I'm not going to let disappear into the wind. You need to decide which side of this you're on, now." For the first time, his eyes flickered, the mask slipping. I could see the conflict there, but it was buried under years of compromise. Behind him, one of Reed's operators called over the radio, "Perimeter set, awaiting breach." Mark heard it too. His hand twitched toward the access panel beside the bay door, then stilled. "I can't help you," he said finally. "Not this time." The words landed heavier than I wanted to admit. This was the man who'd dragged me through smoke and gunfire, who'd taken a blade meant for me, and now he was choosing the other side. I stepped back just enough to see his whole frame, memorizing every detail. The slight limp in his left leg, the faint tremor in his right hand, the scar that split his eyebrow. Details matter when you don't know if the next meeting will be across a table or through a rifle scope. "Then you're in my way," I said quietly. Mark's jaw set, but he didn't move aside. Reed's voice came over the net again, lower this time. "Sinclair, your call. We can go through him." I looked at Mark for another beat, searching for the man I'd known. If he was still in there, he was too far under to surface now. "Do it," I said into the mic. The operators moved in fast, their formation flowing around me like water. Two had Mark's arms pinned before he could react. Another swiped his badge from his belt. He didn't fight hard, maybe because he knew how it would end if he did. As they pulled him clear of the bay entrance, he met my eyes one last time. "You'll see," he said, voice almost calm. "One day, you'll see why I did it." I didn't answer. The bay door rolled upward with a groan, revealing the maze beyond. Rows of stacked containers, forklifts, and the sharp tang of oil and wet steel. The sound inside was different from the open tarmac. It was close, metallic, a heart beating inside a cage. I stepped across the threshold, the noise of the rain dimming behind me. The operators fanned out, flashlights cutting white paths through the dim interior. Somewhere in here was the pallet Mark had been ready to let walk. The sting of his betrayal was still fresh, but it had already hardened into something I could use. Pain sharpens, but only if you keep it moving forward. I wasn't here for reconciliation. I was here for the cargo, and no amount of history was going to change that. The smell of wet metal and diesel clung to the air inside cargo D7. Floodlights mounted high on steel beams cast long, sharp-edged shadows across the maze of containers. The sound of boots echoed on the concrete, a steady counterpoint to the low rumble of forklifts idling in standby. Reed's voice came over the comms, crisp and focused. "Target in sight. Container 308. 2 suspects on it now." I advanced down the narrow lane between stacked cargo, flanked by 2 operators. The rows seemed to close in the deeper we went, a claustrophobic geometry of corrugated steel. At the end of the row, I caught the first glimpse of the scene. 2 men in high-vis vests crouched at the container's heavy lock, one working a bolt cutter while the other kept glancing over his shoulder. They weren't expecting resistance here. They thought the security was already theirs. "Move," I ordered softly into the mic. The operators surged forward, weapons angled low but ready. The bolt cutter clanged to the ground as the man holding it froze, realizing too late what was happening. His partner took a half step back, then turned as if to run, only to find another team closing in from the other side. Within seconds, both were on their knees, hands zip-tied behind their backs. The air seemed to tighten as all eyes turned to the container. "Open it," I said. Reed stepped up, taking the heavy steel latch in both hands and swinging it free. The lock clattered against the door, the sound sharp in the cavernous space. With a groan of metal hinges, the doors creaked open. Floodlight beams sliced into the darkness inside. For a heartbeat, all I saw was the dull silver gleam of reinforced steel. Then my stomach sank. A safe. Not just any safe, an industrial-grade vault, large enough to hold a small engine, bolted to the container floor. Its door hung open on massive hinges. Inside was nothing but empty shelves. The hollow space seemed to swallow the noise in the room. No documents, no weapons, no contraband, just emptiness, and the faint, musty smell of a container that had been closed too long. Reed swore under his breath. "They cleaned it before we even hit the perimeter." I stepped closer, running a gloved hand over the safe's cold interior. The edges of the shelves were dusty, but not uniformly. Someone had removed whatever had been here recently, and in a hurry. "Decoy," I said. The word felt like iron on my tongue. "They wanted us here." The 2 men we'd caught kept their eyes down, their breathing fast and shallow. They knew exactly what was supposed to have been inside and exactly how bad it was that it wasn't. One of the operators knelt to inspect the floor beneath the safe. "Fresh scrapes on the bolts. This wasn't sitting here long." I turned to Reed. "What's the time gap between when this was last in secured storage and now?" He checked his watch. 47 minutes. "Tops!" 47 minutes. Enough time for a truck to clear the airport, even with bad weather. Enough time for whatever had been inside to vanish into the city. The adrenaline that had been carrying the team forward now shifted, thinning into frustration. This was the drop in the curve, the moment when the high of the chase collapses under the weight of what's been lost. The 2 men in vests were hauled to their feet, questions already flying from one of Reed's interrogators. Their answers came fast but empty. Claims of just doing a pickup, no knowledge of the contents, no idea who arranged the clearance. Lies wrapped in the kind of truth that's too small to matter. I stepped back, letting the operator secure the scene. My eyes moved over the layout of the bay, looking for something, anything that didn't belong. A forklift idling near the far wall, its key still in the ignition. A set of tire tracks in the dust along the west exit, sharper and cleaner than the ones near the other doors. "West exit," I said into the mic. "Get a unit on it now. If they rolled the real load out of here, that's the way it went." Reed relayed the order, but I could hear the unspoken calculation in his tone. The window was closing fast. Every minute out there was a mile further away. I looked back at the empty vault, the reinforced walls, the locking mechanism. It was all meant to sell the illusion that this was the prize. Whoever had set this up understood the psychology of the hunt. Give the predator something that looks like a meal, and they'll stop running just long enough for the real prey to get away. My fingers tightened around the violet handkerchief in my pocket. The broken pen inside pressed against my palm, a reminder of Sloane's little theater act in the cabin. Another distraction to keep my attention split. Red Basin had played this like a 3-layer game, and we were still in layer 1. "Package is gone," I said to Reed quietly. "And they're ahead of us." His jaw tightened. "We'll get it back." I didn't answer, because in that moment, the truth was simpler and colder. Whatever had been in that container wasn't coming back tonight. The best we could do was figure out where it was going, and why they wanted it so badly. They were willing to burn 2 assets and an entire decoy op just to move it. The suspects were led away, their footsteps echoing off the steel walls. Operators began photographing the scene, logging every mark, every scrape, every fiber left behind. It was procedure, but we all knew the real lead was already somewhere beyond the airport perimeter. As I stepped out into the rain again, the floodlights behind me casting long shadows across the tarmac, I felt the shift in my own pulse. The high was gone. The certainty was gone. In its place was the weight of the clock, ticking louder with each step. This wasn't over. It wasn't even close. But tonight, we'd lost the first round. The rain hadn't let up. It drummed against the tarmac, masking the sound of my boots as I crossed from D7's yawning steel mouth back toward the operations van. Inside, the glow of monitors painted everything in shades of blue and green. Airport schematics, live camera feeds, and a dozen overlapping comm channels. An analyst swiveled in his chair as I entered. "We pulled every camera within a half-mile of D7, he said, fingers flying over the keyboard. "Traffic cam at West Exit caught a truck, but plates are unreadable, deliberately obscured." I leaned over the desk. "Run it against container yard manifests. Look for any pallet transfers in the last hour that weren't logged at D7. While he worked, another operator slid a tablet toward me. "We also flagged these movement logs from cargo loaders on the other side of the field." I scanned the timestamps. The realignment of data points felt like pins clicking into place inside a lock. There it was, a sequence of load transfers at Hangar 4, almost exactly 47 minutes ago. Same window as the empty vault's removal. The cargo had bypassed all the ground routes and gone straight onto a separate aircraft. "Pull me the live feed for Hangar 4, I said. The analyst tapped a key, and the screen split to show a grainy overhead view of a wide-body cargo jet idling at a remote stand. Its tail bore the livery of a private freight carrier, one I knew to be a Red Basin shell. The aircraft's nose door was closing, loaders backing away. "Scheduled departure?" I asked. 3 minutes, the analyst replied. The pulse in my neck ticked faster. "Who's in the cockpit?" A third feed popped up, a jet bridge cam from the passenger side of the business terminal, earlier tonight. The face in the frame wasn't supposed to be there. The captain of my flight, in uniform, crisp and composed, shaking hands with ground staff before disappearing into the crew access tunnel. His name tag was clear in the frame. Captain D. Roscoe, the same man who'd exchanged that subtle nod with Sloane before takeoff. "They ran the cargo through him," I said quietly, almost to myself. Walker kept me busy while her captain friend moved the real package. Reed's voice cut in over comms from the perimeter team. "Sinclair, talk to me. They're airborne in 3 if we don't stop them. This isn't just freight. It's the freight. Roscoe's flying it." There was a beat of silence. Then Reed came back, voice sharpened. "What's your play?" I looked at the analyst. "Get me FAA control on a secure line." Within seconds, a tinny voice came through. "FAA command. Who am I speaking to?" "Ava Sinclair, Sentinel Aero. You have an unauthorized cargo departure on runway 29 left. Tail number November X-ray 42. 1 Delta. Contain on the ground. Now." The FAA controller didn't hesitate. "Copy. Diverting ground traffic, halting runway clearance." On the monitor, we watched as the freight jet's taxi slowed. A follow-me vehicle angled across its path, yellow lights strobing. Another vehicle joined from the opposite side, boxing it in. The tower feed crackled, Roscoe's voice coming over the frequency. "Control, this is NX421D. We're on a priority schedule, cleared by..." The controller's reply was calm steel. "Negative, NX421D. Hold position immediately. Do not enter active runway." For a moment, the aircraft just sat there, engines spooling like a threat. Then one of the cockpit windows slid open, and a figure leaned out, too far away to read his face. But the tension was visible in the posture. Reed's operators moved in from the perimeter, SUVs cutting across service roads toward the stand. 2 minutes to contact, Reed said in my ear. "Make it 1, I told him. Back on the feed, I saw Roscoe glance toward his first officer, then back at the vehicles hemming him in. The nose wheel turned a fraction, then straightened. Compliance or a feint. "Prepare for breach," Reed ordered. The operators rolled to a stop just shy of the fuselage, armored doors swinging open. A team advanced on the nose ladder, another toward the rear service hatch. FAA ground staff stood back, eyes wide, clearly aware they were watching something far beyond a routine security check. Inside the van, the monitors showed every angle at once. Flashlights cutting through cockpit glass, hands raised from inside. The forward hatch opening under firm instruction. Roscoe emerged first, still in full captain's uniform. Cap perfectly straight, as if nothing about this was unusual. His eyes swept the tarmac, finding the nearest camera, then, deliberately, the lens on the van feed. He smiled. Reed's voice came again. "Sinclair, we have your man." I leaned closer to the screen, locking on Roscoe's expression. "You have one of them," I corrected. "The rest of this game is still in motion." Because even as they walked him down the mobile stairs in flex cuffs, I could feel it. That cold certainty Red Basin had prepared for this contingency. They didn't put all their leverage in one container. They never did. But for now, watching the cargo door reopen under armed guard, I let the curve of adrenaline climb again. We'd taken back the board, if only for a moment. And sometimes, a moment was enough to set the next move. The night had turned electric, not from the storm, but from the media storm brewing just outside the perimeter fence. By the time Reed's operators marched Roscoe down the mobile stairs, a half-dozen press vans had already staked out the service road. Their telescopic lenses bristled like weapons, shutters firing in a rapid staccato as floodlights from camera rigs lit the tarmac in unnatural daylight. Roscoe kept his chin high, the smirk from earlier still etched on his face. He was cuffed, flanked by 2 operators in black tactical armor, but he walked as though he were stepping into a press conference of his own making. The first flash hit my eyes as I stepped out from the operations van. The air buzzed with shouted questions, the reporters desperate to capture any thread of narrative. Is it true the pilot was working for a terrorist network? What's in the cargo? Who's leading this operation? The questions bounced off me like hailstones on armor. I kept moving, eyes fixed past the cameras toward the service gate. I had no intention of handing Red Basin a soundbite they could twist. Reed caught my shoulder as I passed. "They want a statement." "They can want," I said flatly. Still, the crowd surged closer, microphones thrust forward, bodies pressing at the thin line of airport security holding them back. The floodlights reflected off the wet tarmac, throwing sharp highlights on the violet handkerchief now half visible in my pocket. And that was when I saw her. At the edge of the crowd, near a van with its news logo covered by a tarp, stood the elderly woman from the business class cabin, the one who had slipped me the handkerchief in the middle of Sloane's little performance. She was exactly as I remembered. Silver hair in a neat twist, a dark coat buttoned to the throat, eyes sharp enough to cut through the din. Our gazes locked, and something in her posture shifted. She stepped forward, not toward the cameras, but toward me, weaving through the chaos with the kind of unhurried confidence that only comes from knowing you belong anywhere you decide to be. When she reached me, her voice was pitched low, just for my ears. You held your ground. I didn't have much choice, I replied, scanning her face for the motive behind this sudden reappearance. Oh, there's always a choice, she said, the corner of her mouth curling. And you made the right one. It was then I noticed the small pin on her lapel. 3 interlocked silver circles, each engraved with a different crest. I knew the symbol. Everyone in my line of work did. It belonged to the Interagency Oversight Commission, a shadow council tasked with evaluating field operatives for high-clearance, multi-jurisdiction assignments. You're not a civilian, I said. Not tonight, she replied. You can call me Iris. The name hit harder than I expected. Iris wasn't just a commissioner. She was the commissioner, the one who signed off on the most sensitive cross-border operations. Her word could put someone on a plane to a black site or into a seat at a diplomatic table. Why the handkerchief? I asked. Markers, she said simply. To see how you'd respond under pressure. To see whether you'd cling to anger or use it as leverage. And Sloane? Her eyes flicked toward the hangar where Sloane was now being loaded into a secure transport. She was noise in the channel. Necessary noise. We had to watch how you'd navigate without knowing which pieces were decoys. I realized then that this wasn't just about the cargo or even Red Basin. The entire sequence, from the wine spill to the empty vault, had been a layered evaluation, one I hadn't known I was taking. What's the mission? I asked, my voice low. She smiled faintly. It's bigger than a container, bigger than Red Basin. But if I tell you now, you'll start playing the endgame before we've even set the board. Consider tonight your final interview. Reed approached from behind, clearly catching only the tail end of our conversation. We're ready to move Roscoe to holding. What about the press? Let them stew, I said. No statements. Iris leaned in, her voice dropping further. There will be an invitation delivered through channels you've never used. When it comes, you'll have 1 hour to answer. And just like that, she stepped back into the crowd, disappearing between camera tripods and light stands as if she'd never been there. The press kept shouting, oblivious to the significance of the quiet exchange that had just taken place. I turned away from them, heading toward the waiting transport where Roscoe sat cuffed in the back, still wearing that smirk. For the first time in hours, the curve of adrenaline didn't just spike. It leveled into something sharper, more focused. I wasn't just chasing Red Basin anymore. I was standing at the threshold of something larger, something that had been watching me longer than I'd realized. And Iris had just opened the door. Morning broke with a brittle light over the terminal, the kind that turns glass walls into mirrors. Inside a conference room on the upper floor, I sat at the head of a table that smelled faintly of fresh varnish and stale coffee. Across from me were the airline's legal counsel, the airport authority's deputy director, and 2 representatives from the ground services union. Their faces all carried the same expression, measured politeness masking the discomfort of being called to the table before their first cup of caffeine. On the table in front of me lay a slim folder stamped Fair Skies Charter. The pages inside were dense but deliberate. Policies designed to prevent the kind of cabin-side humiliation Sloane had orchestrated, and to mandate formal investigation whenever an incident crossed the line from service error to targeted intimidation. No more hiding behind company policy when reputations were destroyed mid-flight. I'll be direct, I said, letting my voice cut through the shuffle of papers. You're going to sign this, and you're going to implement it within 60 days. Not because I'm asking nicely, because the alternative is me taking everything that happened last night to the International Civil Aviation Council and letting them make it law without your input. The Airline Council, a man with a tie so bright it seemed defiant, cleared his throat. You're asking us to create a new investigative body, fund it internally, and give it the power to override crew authority during flights. That's unprecedented. So, was what happened in business class, I said evenly. You can call this a concession, or you can call it damage control, but you will call it binding by the end of this meeting. The deputy director of the airport authority shifted uncomfortably. And if we refuse? I slid a small black device across the table. a secure drive containing select highlights from the night's events, Sloane's deliberate spill, the staged security sweep, the knife from her heel, enough to make any regulatory body salivate. Then I leak this, and we find out just how quickly passengers abandon an airline that can't guarantee their safety or dignity. The silence stretched. Then, one by one, the signatures came. Pages flipped, pens scratched. The Fair Skies Charter was no longer a draft. It was policy. I stood, collecting the signed copies and slipping them back into the folder. Congratulations. You've just made air travel a little less of a weapon. As I stepped into the corridor, the hum of the terminal rose up from below. Boarding calls, luggage wheels, the ever-present scent of jet fuel. Iris was waiting at the far end, leaning against a window with the unhurried poise of someone who always has more time than anyone else in the room. "You made them sign," she said, not a question. "They didn't have a choice," I replied. "They never do," she agreed, falling into step beside me. We moved toward a quieter alcove overlooking the runways, where a half-dozen aircraft were taxiing in the distance. "This wasn't the mission," I said, studying her reflection in the glass. "So why are you still here?" She reached into her coat and withdrew a small envelope, the kind used for passing classified documents without electronics. She held it out. "Because it's time you knew what's next." I opened the flap, sliding out a single sheet of heavy stock paper. At the top was the seal of the Interagency Oversight Commission. Below, in Iris's precise handwriting, was a single sentence: "Red Basin has assets inside the FAA." I looked up sharply. "How deep?" "Deep enough that last night's runway stop almost didn't happen," she said. "The order to hold Roscoe's aircraft had to bypass 3 controllers we can no longer trust. One of them was in the tower's top 5 for clearance authority." The realization settled like lead. "So, even if we take them down on the ground, they'll still have eyes and ears in the sky," she finished. "And as long as they do, no cargo, no passenger, and no operative is truly safe." I folded the paper once, tucking it into my jacket. "You're saying last night was just the opening move." "I'm saying," she corrected, "that the board is bigger than you've seen, and the pieces you thought were pawns can still take a queen." For a moment, the noise of the terminal faded, replaced by the sound of an engine spool up somewhere beyond the glass. A departure, maybe, or another Red Basin flight slipping through the cracks while we talked. I turned back to Iris. "Then we stop talking and start moving." Her smile was almost imperceptible. "Good. You'll get your briefing soon. For now, keep the charter in place. It'll buy you cover while we dig." We walked back toward the elevator bank, the weight of what she'd said pressing into the space between each step. Outside, the weather was clearing, but I knew better than to take that as a sign. Storms didn't always start with clouds. Sometimes they started with a single name buried in a clearance log, or a nod from a captain as you boarded a flight you didn't know was compromised. And sometimes, the only warning you got was an empty container and a violet handkerchief in your pocket. The first light of morning spilled across the city, soft and diluted, painting the airport glass in pale gold. From the lounge's panoramic window, the tarmac stretched endlessly, glistening from the night's rain. Aircraft moved in deliberate arcs, guided by unseen hands and silent signals, their tails catching the new day's light like banners. I sat alone at a corner table, away from the hum of travelers starting their journeys. Before me lay the violet handkerchief, folded neatly, the embroidered edge worn smooth by years of use. I'd kept it in my jacket pocket since the moment that elderly woman, Iris, placed it in my hand during the chaos in the cabin. It wasn't just cloth anymore. It was a thread woven through the last 24 hours, binding together every twist, every betrayal, every calculated move. My fingers hesitated before unfolding it. Inside, wrapped with a care that felt almost ceremonial, was the broken silver pen. The cap and body lay apart, the nib bent, a small but irreparable wound in metal. I had every reason to discard it, to let it be swept away like all the other tools and tokens from jobs gone by. But I didn't. I picked up the pen's 2 pieces, feeling the cool weight of them settle into my palm. This wasn't just a reminder of loss. It was proof of something unshaken. The pen had been a gift from a mentor who taught me that survival wasn't the same as living. That the moments when you chose not to let something be taken from you, your name, your word, your humanity, were the moments that defined you. I set the pieces back onto the cloth and folded the handkerchief around them again. Not to hide them, but to carry them. Beyond the glass, a jet arced into the sky, its contrail slicing through the morning blue. The world out there was vast, and somewhere in it, Red Basin was already recalculating. They'd lost a pilot, exposed an operative, sacrificed assets to protect a greater secret. They would be planning their next move. So would I. The lounge attendant passed by, offering a polite nod before setting down a fresh cup of coffee. I returned the gesture but didn't touch it. My focus was on the phone lying face down beside the handkerchief. I hadn't checked it since before dawn. Part of me didn't want to, not yet. I wanted these few minutes of stillness, to let the curve of the last day settle into its final form before it bent again. But the stillness didn't last. The phone buzzed once, sharp and insistent, against the wooden table. I turned it over. The screen lit with a single notification, no caller ID, no traceable origin. Just 4 words, followed by a number. Mission, New York, 36A. I stared at the text, reading it twice, then a 3rd time. There was no sender's name, but there didn't need to be. This was the call Iris had promised. The next door opening, faster than I expected. I felt a subtle shift inside me. The mix of pride and anticipation braided tightly together. Pride in the work we'd done. Not perfect, not complete, but enough to keep the board in motion. Anticipation for what came next, knowing that this wasn't a separate story, but the next act in one that had started long before I stepped onto that plane. My eyes drifted back to the runway, where another aircraft was taxiing into position. Somewhere across the ocean, New York's skyline was catching its own morning light, unaware that within 36 hours, it would be the stage for whatever Iris had planned. I picked up the handkerchief one more time, feeling the shape of the pen beneath the fabric. The silver metal pressed against my palm like a heartbeat. I didn't need it for writing anymore. It had become something else, a compass, a marker of who I was and what I refused to lose. I slipped it into my jacket pocket, the weight settling against my side as naturally as a holstered weapon. Somewhere deep in the terminal, a boarding call echoed over the PA system. I didn't move. Not yet. This wasn't my flight. My next departure would be one I stepped onto, knowing the stakes, knowing the players, knowing that the sky ahead was only as clear as the enemies we hadn't yet seen. A shadow passed across the window as another aircraft climbed into the blue. The handkerchief felt heavier now, not from the pen, but from the choice I'd made to carry it. To carry everything it stood for. In 36 hours, I'd walk into New York with that weight still in my pocket. And when the next game began, I'd be ready. Not because I knew the rules, but because I'd learned to play when there weren't any. I stood, leaving the untouched coffee behind, and walked toward the lounge exit. Outside, the day was opening wide, and the violet handkerchief was warm against my side, the broken pen inside whispering the only truth that mattered. The sky was never empty.